we're going to read the first section of this unit. Now, if you have your question sheets or a piece of loose leaf handy, that'll be good because we are going to read over or discuss a few questions that you will have to answer as we get to them through the reading. So you can have that handy, that'll be helpful, but I will go through and I will read all of the text to you as well. So how does the natural environment affect people and the economy is what this section is titled. So this is a picture here of the Li River in China. And I'm going to start by reading this little box here. So it says more about. So it's going to tell us more about something. Naming Taiwan. Taiwan is the name of an island in the Pacific Ocean off the coast of China. There is controversy over the political status of this island. In 1949, a democratic government called the Republic of China was set up on the island. The People's Republic of China, the communist government that controls mainland China, has never acknowledged the Republic of China as an independent nation. They call the island Taiwan Province. Some international organizations also call it Chinese Taipei. This is something that's very common in the world where when new countries are set up, not every other country decides to agree that they think it's its own being. So this happens actually quite often. It's a big reason why there's a lot of wars in Israel around Jerusalem. And so this is one of those places in the world where its political status is a little bit controversial, and it depends on where you live and what you believe as to what its status and its name is. So physical features in China, Mongolia, and Taiwan. China, Mongolia, and Taiwan are lands of great geographic extremes. Much of the southern part of the region is isolated by towering mountains, while vast deserts stretch across the northern interior. The world's largest population lives on the fertile plains in the east. The landforms and climate of the region strongly influence its population patterns and economic activities. The Himalayas along China's southwest border are the highest mountain range in the world. North of the Himalayas sits the Plateau of Tibet, the highest and largest plateau in the world. Many rivers begin there. They flow south and east to many countries, providing drinking water for 1/3 of the world's population. China's largest rivers, the Yangtze and the Huang, or Yellow, begin on the Plateau of Tibet. These rivers tumble from the highlands down to the plains on the east coast. So as we are looking here, we have a physical map of this area. So as we look at the key, the closer to blue, blue is water, and the closer we get to a pink is the higher it is. So you can see this area here, this purple, is the highest area, and it's all very high. So when we have a high area all together, it is called a plateau. And then, as it makes sense, rivers are going to flow downward. So as we move into the yellow, this is slightly lower ground. And then down here along beside the China Sea and the Yellow Sea, you are going to see flatter areas. And so that's where a lot of our farming is going to happen. And this is actually where the majority of the population of this area lives. So there are 2 map skills questions that I'm going to ask you to answer. The first one is, how does the elevation change from east to west? How might this affect economic activities and people's standard of living? So I kind of talked a little bit about some of the economic activities, but how would that also affect what it's like to live there? Now keep in mind, remember we have this, we call it a compass rose, that'll help us decide the directions. And so we're talking from east to west. The second one is to name at least 3 areas on the map where you predict that large numbers of people live, and explain your reasons in each case. So there are, they've actually labeled some of these areas. So I kind of hinted at it a little bit, but choose 3 areas that you think that a lot of people are going to live and why. Before I get into reading, we're going to take a look at this picture. So this is a house in Shaanxi province in China, and they were carved out of the hills. So this is actually part of the hill, and they dug into the hill to make the house. So the island of Taiwan, by contrast, has mountains on the east and fertile plains in the west. Mountains and highland plateaus cover much of Mongolia. A huge desert called the Gobi stretches from southern Mongolia toward the Huang River. Winds from the desert, carry loess into China. Loess is a dust-like material that can form soil. It can pile more than 30 meters deep. Some people carve caves into the loess hills and build their homes in them. The Huang River cuts through these deposits, picking up the loess. Huang means yellow in Chinese. If you hopped on board a boat along the river, you would see that the loess makes it look yellow and muddy. The Huang River created the North China Plain by flooding the area many times. Each flood left behind fertile soil. For thousands of years, Chinese people have farmed the flat lands along the country's rivers. Landforms such as rivers affect where people live. Climate is also important when people decide how to use the land. This idea of creating areas of farming based on floods around rivers is actually very common throughout most of the world. Climate and land use in the region. There are two important climate patterns that affect China, Mongolia, and Taiwan. In the first pattern, the climate is generally colder in the north and warmer in the south. The south has hot, humid summers and mild winters. In the subarctic north, summers are short while winters are long and very cold. In the second major climate pattern, the climate in the west is drier than in the east. Winds blowing from the south carry moisture from the Pacific Ocean to Taiwan and eastern China. Tall mountains block these winds, so the climate of Mongolia and western China is dry. Two great deserts, the Gobi and the Taklamakan, stretch for hundreds of kilometers across this area. These climate patterns influence how people use the land. South of the Chang River, people grow crops that need abundant water, such as tea and rice. On Taiwan's wet western plains, farmers grow rice and other tropical crops such as sugar and bananas. So here we have another map, and this is going to be on the other side as well, a little bit, or no, sorry, I lie, just this one. And it's going to talk about our different ecosystems. So we talked about ecosystems in science earlier this year. And so we have tundra, subarctic, continental with a cool summer, continental with a warm summer, humid subtropical, tropical wet and dry, semi-arid, and arid. So you can see that they actually have almost everything except for tundra. So as they have desert over here in the arid areas, and then it transitions to semi-arid. In the purple is subarctic, so it's going to be the dark purple. That's going to look like our northern Canada. So talking about Northwest Territories, it's cold and there's not a lot of growth. There's lots of snow. Then we have continental cool summer, continental warm summer as we're getting closer towards the water, as well as humid subtropical where you're going to have more of the rainforest look, and it's not going to get a whole lot of snow in this area. Very rarely would it get any snow, really. Between the Chang River and the Huang River, both rice and wheat are grown. The fertile North China Plain north of the Huang River is too dry for rice. Here, wheat is the staple crop and the basis of most people's diet. Rainfall in northern China is similar to that in Saskatchewan, but the temperature is warmer. China's growing season is longer and there's less risk of frost damage than in Saskatchewan. So when we look at that, although we don't grow rice in Saskatchewan, we definitely grow wheat. That's one of the things that we are known for growing here in Saskatchewan, and so they have some of the same crops. Still farther north and west, the climate is usually too dry for growing crops. People in these regions have lived mainly as migratory herders. They must move their herds to find sources of water and grassland. In recent years, industry has expanded in China, Mongolia, and Taiwan. More people have moved to the cities to work in offices and factories rather than as farmers or migratory herders. Large industrial areas have grown around the cities of the region. So when we talk about migratory herders, they follow their animals to wherever it is best for them to live. So wherever there's food and water is where they're going to go. But there's been a major shift in that in recent years as they're creating more offices and factories. So we're going to look at this profile here of Charles E. Saunders, scientist and developer of prairie wheat. In 1904, Canadian scientist Charles E. Saunders developed marquee wheat in Saskatchewan. Testing at the Indian Head Experimental Farm proved that it could be harvested 10 days earlier than other types of wheat. This cut the risk of frost damage in the West's short growing season. By 1920, nearly all farmers on the prairies grew marquee wheat. Building on Saunders' innovations, scientists have developed even better varieties of wheat in recent years. Now, it might seem that 10 days is not a very long time to be able to harvest your wheat earlier, but if you think that we really only get from May to September, so that's about 5 months. So we only have 150 days that we can actually grow it from planting it to harvesting it. So 10 days earlier is actually a ton of time to be able to get it off before the frost. So here we're going to take a look at the land use. You'll notice there are some map skills questions. It does ask us to compare to the map on the previous page, so you might have to do a little bit of flipping. And so it is how the land is used. And so we'll look at the key. So purple is barren. Then we have brush. So brush would be just natural grasses that live there. It would be just sort of a natural land. But it wouldn't be like lots of grass. It would be like short shrubs, that type of thing. Cropland is mostly rice with the lines through it. And cropland that is not rice is going to be this bright yellow color. There's forest, there's grassland, there's glacier, mixed, meaning that they do some of a lot of different things, savanna and open woodland, and then red is urban, and urban means it's a city. So, and then the little circles obviously will tell us where the actual cities are. So the two questions that I will ask you to answer in the map skills are to use this map as well as the climate map on the previous page, page 218, and answer, how does climate influence the land use? So when you're looking at the different climate areas, how is that changing the way that we use the land? And the second question is to use evidence from the map to predict the population level along the Chang River. Explain your prediction. So the Chang River is right in here, okay? Follows right through here, through Shanghai, Wuxi, Wuhan, which is a name you should know. This is where COVID, the first COVID cases were said to have happened. And it starts up here, up on the plateau of Tibet. And so as we look along that area, what do you think the population level might be? Before we go too far, I am going to talk about this definition. So the definition is arable land. Arable land is land that can be used for growing crops. So if we're thinking about Saskatchewan, we have a lot of arable land, okay? So where do 1 billion people live? Like Canada, China has an uneven population distribution. People settle where they can make a living. Today, this is a region on the move as millions of people migrate to find work. Growing cities. More people live in China than in any other country, yet China's resources are limited. Deserts and mountains cover much of the country. Only about 15% of China's land is arable land, and most of it is in the eastern part of the country. More than 9/10 of China's people live in the east, making some areas very crowded. China has more than 1.35 billion people. That means its population is 41 times greater than Canada's. About 45% of Chinese people live in towns and cities. In Canada, about 80% of people live in cities or towns. Some of China's cities are very large. China's capital, Beijing, has about 22 million people. The port of Shanghai is even bigger, with about 23 million people. More people live in these two cities than in all of Canada. So to give you an idea, Canada's population is about 39 million. So that is very different. That's all of Canada compared to these two cities. Although China's cities are very large, they are still growing quickly. This is because China's industries, which are located in and around cities, are expanding very rapidly. Millions of people are moving from farms to cities looking for work in the hopes of improving their quality of life. So we're going to take a quick peek here. It says more about. So the moving experience. A migrant worker from Chengdu explains why she and her husband moved to a city. We lived in a village that's surrounded by big mountains. Where we were, you really can't make a cent. You raise a little livestock, some crops, but that's not really sufficient. So she was a Chinese migrant. So basically where they lived, they couldn't make enough money to be having savings and buy things. They were basically just surviving. And so they wanted to have something a little bit better. And so that's why they decided to move from their village to a large city. So this picture here is taken in Shanghai's downtown, and it is one of the most populated places in the world. Population density in China and Canada. Population density is the average number of people per square kilometer. Canada and China each have an area of slightly less than 10 million square kilometers. So if we're looking at it, the size of the land is about the same, although we are larger, we're pretty close. Because China has 40 times more people than Canada does, its population density is about 40 times greater. So if I'm looking, this is a map here of population density, and so you'll see we have two map skills questions that I'll have you answer. And so we're going to take a look at the key first. So the very light yellow is about 1 person per square kilometer. And then we move up, and as we move into the dark pink, it is about 195 people per square kilometer. And that's in the rural or the out of the city areas. In our city or urban areas, if we have a square, that's about, inside that square, approximately 10 million people live there. If there's a triangle, it's about 5 million to 10 million. And if there's a circle, it's less than 5 million. So as we look, we have a lot of the very light over here. There's a couple spots in here. There's a city, another city, and those have circles. So that means that they're at that less than 5 million. And then as we move this way, it gets darker and we move more into those pink areas. We have some triangles, so Wuhan, Hangzhou, Hong Kong, those are all triangle cities. And then we have some square cities as well. So we have Shanghai, which is here, and Beijing, which is here. So the first question is, which area of China has the highest population density? What physical features might account for the different population densities on the map? So when we think of all the different maps that we've looked at, why do you think all those people live in those areas, and why are they not spread out more evenly? And the second one is, how do the Chang and Huang rivers affect population density? Suggest geographic reasons to explain your answer. So I already talked a little bit about the Chang River here. And then we have the Huang or the Yellow River here. And so take a look at those rivers and see how is that changing how many people live in those areas. So economic development in both countries is often concentrated in areas of dense population and big cities. These areas offer job opportunities for people migrating from smaller communities and, in Canada's case, from countries around the world. In most countries, rural populations are shifting to urban areas as people try to improve their economic well-being and expand their opportunities. So when we look in 2010, so this is fairly old information, um, but the population density in China and Canada, the population of China was 1,354,000,000 people, and in Canada it was about 34 million. You can see the comparison there on the area. So we are larger, but we're only larger by about 400,000 square kilometers. But when we look at our population density, so the amount of people per square kilometer, 141.5 versus 3.4. So that's a huge, huge difference. And some of you guys have maybe been in countries or lived in countries where the population density was a lot higher, where there weren't single dwelling homes like we have a lot of in our community. At school, if you look around our school, we have a lot of houses, whereas in some places you wouldn't have a whole house to yourself. You would all be living in apartment buildings, which is the case of some of us, but that would be sort of your only option. So we have made it to our thinking it through. I am going to ask you to complete some questions here. So I'm going to ask you to do 1, 2, 3, and 4, so all 4 questions, and I'll read them out loud for you. So the first one, how have landforms, climate, and economic opportunities affected population patterns in China? So using all that different information, how did that affect where do people live? Number 2, why have cities grown rapidly in both Canada and China? Why are people moving to the cities and out of the country? Number 3, what effects might a high population density or lots of people all in the same spot have on people's quality of life or the things that they have? Okay, we talked about quality of life before Christmas. And the last one, number 4, how might a large population help and how might a large population hinder a country's economic development? So what is good about it and what is bad about it? You might choose, and on the handouts it is structured as a T-chart. You might choose to do this as a bit of a T-chart to answer these questions.